Oh, hey there. Welcome to the Nerdy About Nature Podchat series, where I sit down with folks from different backgrounds and experiences to chat all about things pertaining to nature. My name is Ross, and this podcast is an extension of a passion project I started called Nerdy About Nature, which also includes tons of fun educational videos all over Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and basically everywhere else on the internet. Now, all that I create here serves as a means to inspire, educate, and engage folks with the outdoor world so that we can all become better stewards of it, have a little bit more fun when we're out enjoying it, and work to create a more inclusive, diverse, equitable, and just future for each and every one of us in this world that we all share. Because nature, it sure is pretty neat, and I think we should keep it that way. So come on, let's go get nerdy.
Come and take a nature walk with me. We're gonna check out some really cool trees. We're gonna hang around and talk about all those things in nature that we can't live without. Let's go get nerdy, yeah, let's get nerdy about nature. Nerdy, yeah, let's get nerdy about nature, baby. Nerdy, yeah, let's get nerdy about nature. Come on, let's get nerdy about nature.
Buenos dias, fellow nerderinos. Hope you're all doing well today, wherever you may be. So today on the Podchat, we're talking about ways to reduce our consumption of forest products like timber by reclaiming, reusing, and even recycling to a degree the timber that already exists in the world. See, back in the day, all the buildings and houses built in our major timber towns all over the West Coast, from Portland up through Seattle to Vancouver and Victoria and beyond, were all built with some really high quality old growth wood that was readily available everywhere, and without which these towns would have had a lot harder time growing and establishing themselves. Yet, as we've quickly and very recklessly logged through these reserves of high-quality old-growth wood all throughout the Cascadian bioregion and Turtle Island as a whole in just about a century, we've had to turn to building things from lower-quality second-growth wood. Now, typically, when things get demolished or torn down to be rebuilt, all that original wood and materials just get scrapped and thrown into a landfill, despite much of it still being of really high quality. And that's where the budding industry of deconstruction comes in. So I sat down with Adam Corneil, the CEO and founder at Unbuilders and Heritage Lumber, two businesses that are working to slowly deconstruct homes, buildings, and the demolition industry piece by piece to repurpose old timbers and give them new life in new buildings, to reduce the amount of new wood that we need to take from our forests. It is a super inspiring model with huge potential for a better future for society and the planet we all share, and I'm super stoked to bring it to you. Hope you enjoy. All right, so welcome to the podcast. Joined here with Adam Corneil. Would you like to just, start us out by introducing yourself, what we're doing here, where we are, and what you do?
Sure, yeah. Well, thanks for having me. So we're at our reclaimed wood mill on the Fraser River in Maple Ridge. This location is Western Reclaimed Timber, and we also have our other brand, which is merged together with it, is Heritage Lumber. And so we're on a 2-acre site where we bring in material from the demolition industry, deconstruction industry, acquire their material and process it and turn it into new products, new wood products.
It's a pretty awesome site you've got here. You just gave me a little bit of a tour. Yeah, it's awesome. So Unbuilders and Heritage Lumber are your two kind of brands?
Exactly.
And so what are the differences between the two? What do you do?
So Unbuilders is a service provider that goes out to site and takes buildings down, deconstructs them sort of layer by layer, trying to maximize the salvage value and minimize the waste. And then Heritage Lumber is a reclaimed wood brokerage and product manufacturer. So we receive material from Unbuilders, but also from the wider demolition deconstruction sector. Mm-hmm. So that's the distinction between the two.
And you recently moved sites from Vancouver out here.
Yeah, so we acquired Western Reclaimed Timber last September and have been sort of merging operations, Heritage Lumber and Western Reclaimed, and will come out this winter with a single brand.
Is that going to be Heritage Lumber?
Likely, yeah.
To be you're still working on it.
Yeah, there's still a few factors to determine it, but my staff are ready to just be one company.
Yeah, I can imagine. Unbuilders is such a great name, though. I was saying earlier, I don't even know where or when I heard of you guys, but it's been easily 6-7 years, I think. How did you get your start?
So my background is I was a passive house high performance builder renovator So we were doing some really nice houses in primarily Vancouver and deconstructing as part of our process. And
like deconstructing the houses that existed before.
Yeah. So whether it was a renovation or a new build, we would take them down and salvage everything. And we had a small wood shop, would turn that into furniture or products, typically for the same clients. And it was about 2013, 2014, the city of Vancouver came out with new policy around demolition, deconstruction, their green demo bylaw. And I could see that this is the way that the market was going to be moving, that we needed to revisit what demolition looks like, minimize the waste, and look at these very valuable materials. So we started to do the deconstruction on our own, and in 2018 we launched Unbuilders as a standalone company.
In 2018?
2018. So yeah, we're 5.5 years old.
Oh, okay, so I guess I couldn't have heard about you 6 or 7 years
No,
ago. Yeah,
no.
I must have heard about it right as it came out then.
Yeah.
Tell me about the normal kind of demolition business, like, because this is all like the idea of salvaging these old timbers is a relatively new thing to myself as somebody who's not in the industry, and I think like to a lot of people out there, there's still this idea of like demolishing a house or a building. You just like come in with like what are the big balls on a chain?
Oh, like a wrecking ball.
Oh, yeah, big wrecking ball. Take it all down to the ground, take it to the dump, and then like build something new and fresh.
Yeah, exactly. Demolition has been sort of the leading service really since World War II. Ironically, deconstruction is how we used to take buildings down because we didn't waste in the same way that we do or that we have for the last sort of 70 or 80 years. But yeah, demolition it's all about speed and cost. Let's get a building down as fast as possible and as cheap as possible. And it's usually done with an excavator. And they basically crunch it up, mix all the materials together, and that goes to the landfill. And deconstruction is sort of a completely different paradigm where you're approaching the building, looking at it as basically like a material bank and thinking, there's value here in these areas, and how can we capitalize on that, get that material out whole, still as fast and as cheap as possible, but to try to maximize that salvage value, minimize the waste.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a whole different way of thinking about the old buildings.
And so that's kind of like, I imagine like a lot of the kind of like, you see things like doorknobs and cabinetry that goes to places like the Restore.
Yeah.
And you guys focus on the lumber, the timber.
We focus on both. We donate a huge amount of material to Habitat for Humanity and the Reuse People.
Okay, so that's still part of your operations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So that's sort of the initial salvage, as we call that. We come into a building before anything's really going on, ahead of the abatement, before they're starting to remove asbestos, and we'll do all of those fixtures and finishes. We'll get the doors out, cabinets, appliances, and flooring, things like that, and then the sort of demolition abatement process begins. Yeah. And then during the structural takedown, that's where we get the wood. That's where we recover the wood. I can imagine that's I guess depending on the quality or build characteristics of a house, that can be a pretty dangerous thing sometimes. It can be, structurally, like if there's like an old rotted house, trying to figure it out. Yeah, I mean, in the Pacific Northwest, we actually don't have too much rot, surprisingly. There's not really a termite issue or even carpenter ants. Are usually isolated in small pockets. And the old buildings, because they weren't airtight, they weren't heavily insulated, they actually aren't full of mold in the way that you would think they are. So the older buildings, when we open them up and get them back to the bones, the wood is usually pristine. Because they aren't airtight. Yeah. That's an interesting, I guess, like thing to note, because I feel like in new constructions, there's so much focus on making them airtight to like climate control and keep moisture out. But that actually has a way of like trapping moisture in some cases and letting mold fester. Yeah, the newer buildings that are built to high performance, the membranes are actually breathable. So they're usually like vapor open one way. So they can allow vapor to get out of a wall but not come back in. So those are also going to be a lot less or a lot more mold resistant because of that breathability. For about 20 years, we were putting poly, basically just plastic sheets as our membrane behind the drywall, and that's where you get a lot of mold buildup because there's no breathability. So moisture just gets trapped inside the wall cavity.
Okay, so we're in a pretty sweet lumber yard here. Definitely the coolest one I've ever been in. Not that I've been in too many. A lot of the ones that I've been in have been like second and even old growth lumber yards. It's really cool to see so much old wood here. Why is old wood so good?
Yeah, for a variety of reasons. I mean, first you just have the story behind it, and you can see the history on the exterior of it, and the patina and the nail holes and different fasteners.
So much character to it.
So tons of character. It's primarily old growth lumber as well, so it is of high value. You've got tight grain, really high quality wood, and then you've got the environmental factor, which is just the sheer positivity towards the environment that this wood possesses versus virgin lumber that's coming out of the forest today. So there's roughly a 92% embodied carbon reduction in reclaimed wood versus new wood. So you have a dramatic reduction in how much and how many resources go into the production of the same product. So reclaimed wood is the greenest building material on the market. If you're trying to achieve that type of build, you should be specifying reclaimed wood everywhere you can.
Right. And what does that mean, 92% carbon reduction?
So it's all of the resources between energy, water, transportation, everything that goes into the production of that product is the embodied carbon. And so reclaimed wood has a dramatic reduction in that. Because we're essentially taking it from a building. So it's the energy that to capture it through the deconstruction process, transport it to a place like we are here, and then produce it into new products is a 92% reduction versus cutting the tree, pulling it out of the forest, then getting it to the mill and producing a new product.
So if you have two 2x4s, one comes from a fresh cut forest trees, and the other is a reclaimed one. The reclaimed one has 92% less carbon associated with its production.
Yeah.
It's pretty incredible. And yeah, and all the old wood here is just so cool to look at. Like there's so many, like a lot of fir beams I'm seeing behind me here, some really tight, cool old grain, a lot of laminate. Like what are some of the products and stuff that you guys get in here, and where does it come from?
So we get products from the wider demolition industry and Unbuilders. It's a combination of residential and commercial buildings that are coming down. A lot of what we see here is from commercial buildings, so it's bigger beams, bigger timber, and then reclaimed glulam as well. The glulam, especially the older glulam, is really it's really nice grain. It was the highest quality of wood that was specified for it. So we typically mill it up into flooring because it's such tight grain and really beautiful, small knots. So it's visually really nice when you lay it down as floors.
Yeah, and that's from the 60s and 70s, you were saying?
Yeah. Yeah, and then it was also aluminum nail, so we can cut it through our saw and it's not going to ruin our blades.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and then it transferred to steel nails sometime in the 80s, and the quality of wood also started to reduce through time.
Mm-hmm. But the steel nails is also kind of what gives these holes here, like the oxidation you can see.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a little video of that to show people, because that from like a marketable standpoint, when you're looking at like getting reclaimed wood, like that's something that adds so much character that you can't really easily replicate, especially in the same manner in like newer wood. So it's really cool to see that. Like, so everything has a story here.
Absolutely. And yeah, and then the big beams, like we either sell them as is, or we can do custom cut timber packages. And a lot of time with the old bigger beams, we will cut off the outside piece, which we call the jacket, and we sell that for beam wrap. So people will wrap beams in it to make them look like they're big old beams. And then we could use the core for new fresh cut timber.
Just for some people out there who might not know, what exactly is glulam?
So it's glue laminated timber. So you're taking smaller pieces of wood, gluing them together to make a big piece of wood. So it's primarily, you see it as structural elements in older commercial buildings, like big beams, post and beam.
Yeah, and even in newer stuff too, like glulam is really making a comeback these days as we're
absolutely
have just like smaller wood sources in general. So
yeah, and especially with the movement towards mass timber, you've got typically in mass timber buildings, you're going to have glulam columns, CLT, cross-laminated timber decking that goes on top of it, and you can build high rises now with that that type of material.
And CLT, cross-laminated timber, that's basically like a really sturdy piece of plywood, essentially.
Yeah.
Same process of build.
Exactly. Just scaled up from, 3/4 inch to 3-4 inch.
Yeah.
And it replaces concrete.
Give me a little rundown of the type of products that you guys offer here.
So we have a wide product offering. So our biggest seller, I would say, is probably the flooring and the cladding. So we make wide plank flooring, 4, 6, and 8 inch, and then cladding for walls and ceilings, variety of widths and thicknesses. Our flooring is all 3/4 inch, and then our cladding's anywhere from 1/2 inch to 3/4. Then we're making beam wrap, as I mentioned, to wrap beams, and doing custom cut timber packages, custom cut lumber packages, and we can do glue up for counters and tabletops as well. And we'll be introducing some new products over the next 6 to 12 months. We'll be moving towards engineered flooring, and then we're making some sheet goods right now, like 4x8 sheets of reclaimed veneer to do feature walls, feature ceilings. We'll be scaling that product line up as well.
And you do, there are like veneer, like tongue and groove packages I saw in your little shed there too.
Yeah.
And so those are all stylized for like different architects or people who want to like make part of their house fancy, and they get this old reclaimed wood and
exactly. Do a feature wall or do a whole room in it. And I mean, where we're really trying to push our company over the next sort of 5 years is sort of melding my background, which I came into this industry as a builder, and so we've partnered with a few people to build some small structures over the last 12 months, and that's really where we're looking to drive the business, is how do we get our wood and our products back into construction on a bigger level. So over the next 2 years, we'll be working with some partnerships with some prefabrication companies to see about getting reclaimed into the structural elements again as well, which there's some hurdles to go through with that, but that's what we're going to be working on. Yeah.
What are those hurdles? What are the kind of, is it like an awareness thing? Because like I was saying earlier, like I've talked to quite a few people on Instagram, carpenters and whatnot, who have reached out and think that the idea of using reclaimed wood in new buildings is just like ludicrous, because it's so much easier to get like new wood that you can modify more, where I feel like with old wood you might be restricted in like dimensions occasionally or something like that. Like
there's a few things. I mean, the biggest hurdle off the bat is the nails, the metal that's in the wood. So that's something we do here. We denail it all, we scan it, make sure it's fully clean of metal. That's the biggest hurdle, I'd say, for most people with reclaimed wood. And
that's because metal that may be embedded in the wood you don't know about can pose a health risk or safety risk if you're like sawing into it.
Exactly. Yeah, you're gonna ruin blades, and it can be dangerous.
Possible kickback and
exactly. So that's the first hurdle. The second is sort of the variability. In terms of look, dimension, it can be all over the place. Like we probably have 1,000 different dimensions here in our material. So that's something we do through our production, is try to standardize that so that it's fairly consistent. I would say that those are the biggest hurdles, is the variability in the metal. And we try to eliminate those hurdles for people in our products.
You've got such a wide variety of wood, like, just looking around, and I'll do another little video here so people watching the podcast can check that out. But you've got, all sorts of smaller wood here from more residential properties, you were saying?
Yeah.
And then you've got like different laminate pieces here, these big fir beams behind me, and then you've got these yellow cedar trussels over there. So like, how do you find these wood sources? Is there like a Craigslist, like a black market? You're just like ear to the ground, like, oh, there's a building being turned down, and you're like,
some of it is that, just like having a pulse on what buildings are coming down, but also this site has been here for 30 years. So Western Reclaimed Timber has been around for about 30 years.
Yeah.
The former owner had a lot of connections in the demolition industry, so a lot of the companies call us first and say, we're taking this building down, we've got this material coming. But we also get sort of one-off situations like the railway ties, where we're either approached or we hear about it through our colleagues, our connections in the industry, that there's a stockpile of material coming down the line, and if we have interest in it. So it's a combination of factors.
Those railway ties are an interesting story, because they're not soaked in creosote like you typically see of railway ties and like telephone poles. You want to tell me a little bit about those and what the plan is with them?
Yeah, so those came out of the Wass Railroad, which was the biggest forestry dedicated railroad in the world. So it was on Vancouver Island, decommissioned, I think, in 2018. And it had run for, I think, about 90 years before that. And so it was a railroad that just basically went right deep into the forest and was servicing the logging industry and just bringing wood back to get to the coast, to get onto ships, to the mills. So when it was decommissioned a few years ago, they pulled up all the railway ties, and a lot of it was old growth yellow cedar that they never put creosote on. And for us, it's amazing to mill this material because some of these ties could have been in the ground for upwards of 90 years, and you cut into it and it looks incredible on the inside. Obviously the outside's taken some wear and tear, but the wood is so solid on the middle. It shows just how incredible some of the old growth cedar really is for resistancy to weather. Yeah,
yellow cedar in particular. That's incredible. Like almost 100 years in the ground. Now, so when you're cutting that up, are you going to like... I don't know how to say it, like skin it basically and preserve the outside for uses in like where someone might want that vibe, and then like mill the inside into wider beams?
Yeah, that's what we're doing a lot of the time. If the outside's really beat up, it might be tough to have that go into a new product of any sort. So it really depends on the tie. But the ones that are pretty square still, we'll like take that outside jacket off as some sort of future product.
But even for like an exterior fencing or something, like yellow cedar is so good for any sort of outdoor weathering. Like you could, I don't know. I guess it doesn't look that pretty. I'm looking at a couple. They're like kind of beat up and warped, but
yeah, some of them are pretty beat.
Yeah, the beauty's on the inside.
It is, yeah. Like we sold a lot of it to one or two architects. It's they've been using it for like decking, docks, exterior staircases. It looks amazing, especially if you saw it across the railway spike lines, so that you can see the spikes in every piece on the outside. It really adds a nice element, and then you can tell it adds a story. So when someone comes and walks on the deck, they're going to ask what this wood is right away.
Yeah, that's like the thing that like drew me to like this idea for a business, is because so much of building and construction in general focuses on, having new timbers or new things where you polish it up and put a nice, coat of varathane on it, and it like has a nice shine to it, but like it almost looks so fake nowadays, especially in my opinion when paired with like all the bare concrete or like white walls that it's often kind of juxtaposed with in modern construction. And to find use out of these old materials, it just like it gives it purpose. It's like it makes sense. It's reduce, reuse, recycle. It's like you're recycling like all this old stuff. It's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's actually upcycling it, because a lot of the time the recycling is taking it to a lower yield. We're actually adding value to it, making it even more valuable.
Right. I've done a little bit of like reclaimed. I had a period in my life when I was like moving houses and built a lot of stuff out of pallet furniture, out of pallets. You can just like, take a chisel and smash the nails out, because like often those nails are like, they have like this crazy I don't know, spikes on them, so like you can't remove the nails like you could in modern pallets. So you gotta like just bust through the nail. But it's so good to like work with that old wood, made like a cool bench, coat hanger, liquor cabinet that I'm pretty proud of.
Nice.
Yeah. But like it's hard for a lot of people to access this type of stuff. These smaller timbers and stuff you have over here, so those are from more residential buildings?
Yeah, residential. I mean, this looks like some authentic barn board that we would have taken off of barns out here in the Fraser Valley. Mm-hmm. But we do get a lot of residential material, primarily from Unbuilders, that material. But that's where the deconstruction market is moving, more so on the policy side. There's a lot of municipalities right now looking at mandating deconstruction. A few already have, like the City of Victoria.
As opposed to demolition?
Yeah. City of Victoria, District of North Van have deconstruction policy in place for pre-1950 homes and pre-1960 homes, the two different regions. So if you're taking a house down that's 1940s in District of North Van, there's rules around how you have to do it, which is including salvaging a certain amount of wood.
But not like a 60s or 70s home?
No, not yet. They're starting on the older stock, and then the thought is to expand that as more and more companies get used to this type of service.
Gotcha.
Because it's a full industry transition. So you're going to have demolition companies becoming deconstruction companies.
Right.
And then the municipalities know it's going to take a few years to do that. And then on the back end, you also need companies like ours that are able to take in an increased volume of material. Because you can see we're quite full at this site right now.
Yeah.
And that's with really only Unbuilders doing it on the residential side, a few smaller players doing a few projects here and there. But as that increases and becomes industry standard, you're going to need the reclaimed wood mill here and others to really start churning out a lot of product.
Right. And how many people do you employ through Unbuilders and Heritage Lumber?
So collectively, we're somewhere around 26, 27 people.
Yeah. Full-time.
Full-time, yeah.
Which is, yeah.
In both Vancouver and, Maple Ridge here and Vancouver with Unbuilders, and then Victoria as well. We've got an Unbuilders operation in Victoria.
Okay, so your kind of main hubs are the greater Vancouver area and Victoria?
Yeah.
Are there many other organizations similar to yours, like working around that or outside of that area?
So there's a few small deconstruction companies that have started up in the last 12 months, one in Vancouver, one in Victoria, and then deconstruction's a bit older in the US. So there's been some pretty heavy deconstruction activity in the Bay Area, a lot in California, Chicago.
And that's a great climate for it too. Like everything's probably dry and in such good condition.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, we're not inventing the service or inventing the industry, but we're trying to do a couple of things. We're really trying to introduce it on a large scale to Canada, and have been doing that for the last 5.5 years. But we're also looking at it with a really wide lens to say this is a movement that we don't want to just build one, a small company within our region. Not that there's anything against that. We really want to be part of a movement towards deconstruction as an industry shift. And however we can do that, however we can help facilitate that, whether that's working with our competition to help them do the same thing that we do, or just on the back end with the mill here, working with demolition contractors to say we want your material, we can assess it, we can buy it, and you have an outlet for it.
Yeah, and it's such a good kind of market shift to be making. I mean, especially when it comes to like the old big timbers I see, like those are that's like wood, like these big four over here that I'm looking at, like that of new material, and those are short, those are like 6-foot cuts. Like
those are just the offcuts. Yeah.
Those are the offcuts. Yeah. So if you had like big beams like that, are so expensive and so rare these days to find, like that only comes from old growth forest. Like that's not a second growth tree that's being cut out of.
No.
Like if we can reduce the demand of like on old growth forest by reusing these old timbers, it takes the demand off, and then all of a sudden we can focus on more regenerative like forestry methods, but then also construction methods with more glue lam and different things. So it's an awesome direction to be headed.
For sure. And that's something that I've sort of looked at over the last few years with the War of the Woods happening and a lot of the protesting around the old growth logging. I'm really trying to have people connect both the logging the old growth and the problems that comes with from an environmental, social standpoint, and then also the deconstruction reclaimed wood sector, because you do have wood shops, you've got a lot of jobs that are reliant on that logging or reliant on those logs. But we could achieve some of that wood, not all of it, but you could get some of that wood from reclaimed sources. And some of those wood shops might just not be either looking for that or set up for it. But I'd like to see us connecting those dots, that if we are going to see a ban on old growth logging or a dramatic reduction, without putting some wood shops out of work, perhaps their old growth sources of material can shift to reclaim old growth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in the same time, it's like skill development, because it's no longer taking like industries that are mostly automated with like, logs go into a mill. Like if you've been to a new modern mill and see the way that those mills operate, like it's just like it's like a conveyor belt machine where it's just like whole logs go in, and humans basically like stand over the machines and let the machines do the work of cutting everything down. But if you're working with this type of product, it requires like a lot of skilled labor. Like you can't automate the denailing process, for example. Like every piece of wood is unique.
Yeah. Although there is a company that's making a machine right now to automate the denailing, which we're very excited about when that does come to market. They're making good progress. But for the most part, your point is right. Like when it comes to even just sawing it, putting it onto the resaw, it's something that has to be done by a human. Like you got to be able to look at the wood, know which way the grain's running, and try to maximize the value based on where it's checking, where it's moving.
Yeah, and it's more than just like a 3-dimensional product that is like your standard height, width, length dimensions. It's like looking at the grain. Like again, like those beams over there that I'll try to zoom in on from here. Like the grain on them is so tight that like, just entering those numbers into a computer like wouldn't do it justice for like a machine to cut it and figure out the best way to mill that wood. It's like incredible grain quality there, and then like you've got the saw marks on the outside. It's just it's beautiful. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing we're dealing with is just the sheer volume of variability. And that's where the human element is also important to look at. From a single job, you might get 100 different dimensions of material. Even within a stack of 2x4s from a house, they're all over the place, the older houses. And so you got to get to a point where you can look at the material and know how you can maximize product out of it.
Cost-wise, how does it all pan out?
It depends on the dimension and the material type. So if you're comparing like a reclaimed 2x4 to a new 2x4, reclaimed tends to be more expensive, and that's because of the labor that goes into getting it ready for production again. So the deconstruction denailing process. But some of the material that we get is also less expensive. Most of the less expensive stuff is your SPF, your spruce pine fir from sort of 1980s to today. It's a lower grade of lumber, not as tight grain, and most of that we actually donate to the charities we work with. But some of that we'll also liquidate it and sell it cheaper. But yeah, the big timber and the nicer products, they tend to be a little bit more expensive than modern lumber.
And when you're doing this, like, do you ever get wood donated to you from construction sites or demolition sites?
Yeah, we do.
You have to pay for most of it?
We do pay for most of it. Sometimes we'll get loads. On most loads, we'll get pieces that come in that they're not valuable for us to resell, and so we won't pay for those ones. We can tell the company that we'll keep it and we'll saw it up and see what we can make from it, but we're not going to pay for it. But for the most part, yeah, we're paying for full loads that are coming from demolition contractors. And
if you don't take it, it typically just goes to like, it just gets burned or thrown away if you're not taking it.
For the most part, yeah. There's a few different like recycling outlets that can take it, but they're gonna either mulch it up or
right.
Yeah.
Do they turn that into like particle board or anything, or try to make products out of it, or is it just like mulching it to make it easier to deal with?
It's usually like the main sources of recycled wood in at least Greater Vancouver is biofuel. So they'll mulch it up and they'll burn it and capture energy, or contouring material, which is they mulch it up and then it still goes to the landfill and it basically fills in the voids in the landfill. Both are not the best from an environmental perspective. I mean, biofuel, you're still burning the wood and releasing the carbon into the atmosphere. Contour material, it's still going to the landfill. It's actually worse because you're transporting it twice and putting energy into mulching it to get it to the landfill.
Right. And then there it just decomposes anyway.
Exactly. It turns into methane.
Yeah. And then is it a requirement for buildings to be deconstructed? Do you have to be hired to do that? And is that more expensive than like your classic demolition team, like going in? Like,
yeah, so most regions you don't have to deconstruct, you can just demolish. And when you're looking, we got to divide between residential and commercial. Residential deconstruction, because of our charitable partnerships and the donations that we generate through the deconstruction process, a lot of time we can be cost competitive with demolition. You're going to have an upfront higher cost of deconstruction, but we get a tax receipt for the homeowner. and that can drive the price in competition with demolition. Commercial is a bit of a harder game to compete just purely financially.
And much bigger projects too.
Yeah, they take longer, they cost more. So we typically see deconstruction in the commercial sector more on like the heritage style of buildings that there is either community sensitivity to it, or the municipality does not want that building to be demolished. And that's when they're typically pushed towards deconstruction. Now there is deconstruction policy coming out, or there's a few regions that have deconstruction policy already. District of North Vancouver, City of Victoria, as of this year, they both have mandated deconstruction in residential projects. City of Vancouver has a green demo bylaw, so it's more around recycling and less around salvaging. It was the first. It was definitely a push forward. City of Vancouver definitely has to upgrade their policy. It's time. And then in the U.S., there's other areas that have mandatory deconstruction. The biggest one being in the Bay Area. A lot of the municipalities down there, they mandate that you cannot demolish any building anymore. And so that's sort of the writing on the wall for us, that this is coming to every municipality in Canada and the U.S., or most, I would think, over the next sort of 5 to 10 years.
Is there much help with government from funding? Or you said you were writing a bunch of grants coming up here. Like, where's all that money coming from? What kind of support are you guys getting?
So that's mostly on the heritage lumber side, on the milling side, because we're creating a lot of manufacturing jobs and products. So there's various different funding outlets, grant funds for that type of activity when it's creating manufacturing jobs within Canada, and then also innovative new sources for wood products. There's some substantial funding for that. And we have received Clean BC funding in the past for both organizations, which is, yes, sort of wrapped around green jobs and green manufacturing in BC.
What sort of those innovative new products are you hoping to expand into?
So right off the bat, we're looking at going from solid flooring to engineered flooring. So having a veneer with more of like a plywood core. It is more stable, and it also increases the market, because a lot of people are putting engineered flooring in new construction, typically putting it on a concrete subfloor that has in-floor heating. So you can still install solid wood flooring on that as well, but most people opt for engineered. So we're looking to expand the market in that way.
And it's because engineered is typically cheaper, right?
It's cheap. Well, it's more stable is the big thing, that it's not going to move a lot.
Like warp or expand with temperatures, yeah.
Because of that plywood core.
Right.
But you can still get the same real wood look with the veneer on top.
Right.
The other products that we're looking at is more sheet goods and a variety of different sheet goods. So 4x8, 4x9 sheets. So you could do like a feature wall in our sheets instead of drywalling, and instead of installing piece by piece of wood.
And that's just a way to kind of make more use out of those smaller timbers and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And even our offcuts that we get when pieces come off the mill and we're less than 3/4 inch for our cladding or our flooring.
Yeah.
Now we can put it back into plywood production and still maximize the use. And then we have other products that we try down the line from there.
Yeah. I mean, God, going back to taking the glue lambs and making flooring out of that, like, you said you do 4, 6, and 8 inch wide like flooring pieces.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Like, because like an 8 inch flooring of like a new material these days, again, it's hard to come by. It's like much more sought after. It's so expensive. So to get that from like a reclaimed source is just awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And we want to take our next line when we get into the engineered flooring even wider, go up to 11, 12 inches, because we've got that material in that width.
And that's like really old school buildings you've seen that in. Like I can remember going into like a couple heritage homes that like buddies were renting in like Seattle or something, and just seeing those massive old floorboards that you just don't see on the market these days. They don't exist. Like, what's the coolest piece of wood you've had come through here, or that you've ever worked with in your time doing this work?
The coolest piece. The first ones that come to mind are these beams that we took out of 100 Braid Street in New West. It was old BC distillery. We have a couple pieces of them still here, but they were enormous beams that were 15 inch by 21 inch solid timber. So basically like a tree each beam. And we got, I think, 25 of them out of that building. Fir, yeah, solid old growth, tight grain fir, like just incredible. Yeah, those are pretty special pieces. And we built some benches. We sold a bunch of them to a timber framer who was going to do his own house out of them, like mill them, keep them pretty big and mill them into a new timber frame.
Cool.
Yeah, those are pretty spectacular.
What about like the coolest old building, I guess, that things came from? Anything that like is striking to you, like an old train station or...
We took down, I mean, the coolest one we've taken down is a barn in Chilliwack that was from 1889.
Wow.
And we still have some of the material here. So all the posts and beams were all hand hewn. So like cut by hand. So you can see all like the chopping marks on them. Nothing is uniform or square. It's all timber dowels as well.
Really? Yeah, no nails or anything?
No nails. The whole structure was built that way. I guess it was a bunch of Swiss carpenters that had come over here in the 1880s and had a bunch of farms in that area and built several barns like that. The homeowner knew the history behind it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that one was really cool for us. And then we've taken down some interesting historic buildings. One in Vancouver called Turner's Dairy, which was the old dairy distribution center for Vancouver. So when the milkman was around, all the vans would go there, fill up, and then drive around to the neighborhoods. Or there's even pictures of it with horse and carriage before it was delivery cars.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a warehouse the first warehouse was from around 1910, and then it sort of kept building on over the decades. So really, really cool building.
And where does that wood go? Like, sometimes will a homeowner, like the barn, for example, will they be like, hey, can you take this down? And then I want the wood back, or does it go to like open market, or how does that work?
It can go either way. So Turner Dairy is an interesting one because the developer retained about half the wood. So we took the whole structure down. They had these huge timber trusses that they brought to a wood shop that then sandblasted all the paint off. And then they refinished them and put them back into the townhouses that were built there. So all the structure, all the ceiling structure and a lot of the big beams in those new townhomes was actually from the original warehouse. So really, really cool development. And then other times we just acquire all the material. So the owner just wants the building gone, whether they want deconstruction or it's the best process for how their building stands. That can go either way, but yeah, I'd say most of the time the people don't want the material, but they do want to see it salvaged.
And then like a lot of your products end up going basically like direct to consumer in a sense, like you're going straight to either like a developer or architect who's like working to add or include structural or artistic features, or people who are building their own thing and people can just walk down here to the mill yard and be like, and have a conversation.
Yeah, like some people will come and buy one piece of wood from us. Other times we're outfitting, a 10,000 square foot flooring order for a huge house or a small apartment building.
But you're not going to Home Depot.
Yeah, no, it's not the same.
Yeah, I can imagine the markups aren't quite the same there.
Yeah, and the sources where they get it.
Yeah, it's just such a cool thing, cool part of town too. Like we were talking earlier, like, you're right next to this whole stretch of the Fraser is just like littered with like old mill yards, and like there's still booms of rafts like across the water. I can see big booms. And if you ever fly into Vancouver, this is like probably the area that you'll like taxi over either coming in or leaving.
Yeah.
And it gives you a really big look at like the scale of production still happening in the province. And you're just this little 2-acre plot here. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the area.
Yeah, I mean, historically, this has been a lot of the mills along the Fraser River. And, the lumber industry is really one of the main industries that built British Columbia post-colonial times. So it's such an integral part of the province and of the fabric of British Columbia. And so, I'm a huge history lover, and I find it amazing that we're on, a historically... a historic mill site here, but getting the material not from trees being cut in the forest, but getting it from old buildings that were built back turn of the century. And every morning that we drive in here, we drive by our neighbor that's a mill that's taking logs and milling a variety of products as well. Sometimes they're getting some big old growth logs, and for me that's sort of inspiration for why we do what we do. We can get a lot of that beautiful wood, but without cutting the trees down, we're capturing it from buildings.
Yeah, I saw some big firs when I drove in here earlier too.
And it's
daunting.
It's a fine line for me, because I'm obviously the lumber industry has been such a big piece of the province and of this area. And even me as a builder, I mean, we need wood, and wood is better environmentally than concrete and some other alternatives. So it's part of society that we need, and that we need to have a healthy sector, a healthy forestry sector. Obviously I'd like to see the old growth timbers that are still standing, but I'm not going to dive too much into that, other than, we do capture old growth fiber without cutting down the big old trees, because they were cut 100 plus years ago. And so we're just sort of paying homage to those old trees and recapturing it and getting it back in supply.
Yeah, have you seen, there's, with construction, there's all sorts of pushes to use different materials because wood has become so scarce. Like, I know there's like a lot of like aluminum frame buildings being built, which just seems crazy to me sometimes.
Yeah.
Because like then it's like mining and aluminum mining. Like, sure, we use aluminum in a lot of stuff, but like we don't actually need to increase that if we don't need to, So it is about like not saying that we're not going to be logging or we don't need wood. We certainly do need wood, but it's just about doing things differently and better, like thinking about things just a little bit more than we have been. Like, we haven't, as a society, we haven't been in a space where we're actually like thinking about the means that we're doing it. We're just kind of meeting that, like that demand, post-war boomer mentality of just like, go seize the American dream. Prices are low because it's subsidized. Just like build whatever you want. And that's been kind of like a reckless model to a lot of our ecosystems and these forests in particular. So if we're able to like just maximize what's already been done in the past and find new channels and outlets for it, like it's a great way to move forward. Like,
for sure. And
supporter.
and to that point, like there's a few things to mention. That mentality of like just throw it out and get the next one. That's really what demolition has become. Because as I mentioned, deconstruction was the way we did things 100 years ago. I think everyone, probably remembers their grandparents or their grandfather having jars of nails and things in their basement, because if they took it out of wood, they would save it, because that was, what happened back turn of the century or even into the Great Depression. You had to save your resources because you didn't know if you could get new ones. And then post World War II in North America, it was just in time of abundance, where it was the thought that resources were infinite. And that's really what created the demolition sector that we're looking at challenging. The other thing to note is that over the past sort of 5 to 10 years, you've had mills in British Columbia and other areas, but specifically in BC, closing down for a variety of reasons, but one in the last couple of years has been that there's actually not enough wood fiber in some areas to pull out of the forest to have a fully running mill, and that's from the forest fires, the pine beetle, and just the lack of biodiversity. So for us, that's something I never thought about 6-7 years ago when we were getting into this industry, that we'd get to a point where the mills are actually short on fiber because of the variety of reasons. Yeah,
and a lot of that is also like kind of faulty projections in like what restocking would be when these forests were cut 60-70 years ago. Just last week I met up with Barry Gates, who's the kind of lead forester at Wildwood, which is a eco-forest, like demonstration forest on Vancouver Island.
Okay.
So it's like an old growth forest that they've been managing for over 70 years now, like for timber values, but in addition to like other values, mostly ecological, social, indigenous cultural values and stuff. But just like talking about how a lot of the forests that we were like cut down 70 years ago, planned to like harvest now, we're finding that they're all still understocked, meaning that like the growing conditions weren't what we thought they were. There's still not enough wood fiber existing in those forests that we've accounted for this wood fiber to meet our current demand to keep jobs and stuff operating. So,
wow.
Yeah, going back to like what you're saying, it's just kind of that like retooling of skill sets. So it's like if mills working in these industries are going under because of external factors, whether it be forest fire, beetle kill, lack of timber supply, retooling things and like adding more skill sets to like work with the existing materials we have is like a surefire way to like not only continue to create and sustain jobs, but also the materials that we need to continue functioning and growing, quote unquote, growing responsibly as a society.
Yeah. And I mean, it's only going to get, like the demolition sector is only going to get busier and bigger over the next sort of 5 to 10 years in particular with the big housing push, because you're going to see a lot more density coming. I know City of Vancouver announced on Friday that they're looking at up to 8 plexes on RS1 lots, on single family lots, being able to build an 8-plex. And that's very likely, I think that's going to go through. So you're going to see a huge push to start demolishing all the houses because you can build an 8-plex. And so it's just going to keep increasing, just the volume of material that's going to go to the landfill if we don't stop and think about how that process needs to be different. We need houses. That's a fact. We're short on housing in this country. And that is primarily going to be driven by urban density. So building up instead of out, which means single family houses and smaller old buildings are going to have to come down. And so we hope that those are deconstructed and the material captured to put back in the supply.
Yeah. And then more so from that, it's like building things that last too. Like it's something that we see in basically every aspect of society, I think, these days, is this kind of like short-term myopic mentality of like trying to like maximize your input at a particular time, take advantage of markets while they're hot. And you see a lot with like house flipping, you know, like people will come into like, you know, a cool home, like especially before the pandemic, like you could, like there were these houses on the market that like I was like personally looking at that are now like millions. And I'm just like, God damn it, it's so unattainable.
Yeah.
But you know, there were like $300,000-$400,000 and like cool houses where you had like this character stove, old hardwood floors, really cool, like, you know, unique things, maybe a little bit quirky and weird. And then someone bought that. And then with this mentality of just like, oh, you know, paint it all white, gut it, throw some modern appliances in there, like the cheap bottom line stuff, maybe some IKEA shelves, and then try to flip it and then selling it for hundreds of thousands of dollars more, even though it's like lacking that character. And that's all built with stuff that's like not necessarily sound or going to stand the test of time.
No.
So in our housing market, if we can be doing the same thing where instead of just like trying to throw up, you know, cheap, quick 8-plexes to meet demand right now, why don't, you know, taking these old timbers and building them to last, building them with character and building them so that they age well for the generations and don't just become something that either falls apart in 20 years because we've used cheap, like easy to find materials to throw them up in the first place, or just end up being torn down because we've already like moved on from like what our perceived needs are in building supply, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And even taking that a step further, which is something that's becoming a little bit more common in the design world, which is looking at design for disassembly, which is if I build a mid-rise building today, in 50 years, is that building going to need to become an office building or a warehouse or something different than it is today? Can I build it in a way that we can actually adapt it and change it without taking it down? And so this will be the next line of thinking in the design and build world, is building buildings that are adaptable and deconstructible.
Right. So not necessarily modular, but like building them kind of like Lego sets where you can
compartmentalize.
Yeah, you can take them apart easy.
Yeah, and that's even something we're going to be pushing with our products to take it to the product level too. Over the next few years, is how can we, you know, create new fastening systems so that we can, say, install a floor, and if in 10 years a new homeowner comes in, they don't like that floor, we can pull it out without ruining any boards, put a new one in. So getting down to like the microscopic level of the buildings. Right.
I was going to ask how that happens, but I guess it's all so nuanced and like the different things, like even like joists and stuff, like instead of like cutting like timber frame joists that fit and lock in neatly, you would be doing more like bolt-in patterns, kind of like that style, like so you can like theoretically unbolt that and then save that whole timber and use that for other purposes without having something that's like built specifically to be assembled in a certain way.
It could be that way. Like I turned to like timber framing and mass timber to see some really good examples of connection points. I timber framed for a few years before I was doing the Unbuilders. And yeah, there's a lot that you can do with the timber frame too. I mean, it's kind of naturally deconstructible,
right?
Versus stick framing, which is, you know, 2x4s and nails and plywood and glue. So yeah, the adhesives are one thing that we need to look at because they come for a reason with new construction. It makes it better and more sound. On subfloors, it makes your floors not squeak, but it also makes it so that you can't deconstruct it in the future.
You ever spend much time looking into like Japanese joinery?
Actually, I worked for a company here that was Dyes and Joinery. So the owner, Dai, he's a Japanese fellow, and he's trained in Japan and then brought the philosophy here to a Canadian company.
It's incredible.
Yeah, they do some amazing work, and I did some work with them for about 9 to 12 months. Soaked up everything I could, but the Japanese traditional timber framing is something on a whole other level.
And it's incredible because like I've spent some time in Japan, and like there are these like amazing like multi-story buildings that are built without a single nail. And it's like all just the way that the wood fits together, wooden dowels to like keep everything like taut.
Yeah,
crazy.
it's incredible. And they take them apart hundreds of years later, and they're solid.
And you can take it apart and then move it. It's kind of like, I guess like the North American version would be just like a log cabin, even though that's much more kind of simplistic.
Yeah.
But where you can like theoretically disassemble it, move it to another site, and reassemble it the same way because everything just kind of has a place.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty sweet. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you'd like to touch on or share with everybody?
I don't know. I think we covered a lot of bases.
Where can people go to learn more about Unbuilders and Heritage Lumber, and how can they get involved?
Yeah, you can check out our Instagram, Facebook, or our websites. So unbuilders.com, heritagelumber.ca. And that could be a starting point, or reach out or come down and see us here at the mill in Maple Ridge.
Is there anything people can do from like a policy standpoint or like on a local level to help kind of further this movement?
Yeah, I mean, any sort of pressure or positive push towards deconstruction, reclaim building materials, that would go a long way. Just because of the economic factors, the cost factors, especially on the deconstruction side, they sort of work against the movement. So it is an area where good policy is going to make a big difference. And so, yeah, any sort of pressure on policymakers to start looking at it seriously and making moves would be, much appreciated.
Yeah, and if you're in like the Vancouver, Victoria area here, you're like supporting Unbuilders and Heritage Lumber is a good thing. But then like, anywhere people are in the world and in North America in particular, like surely you could Google something and there's somebody out there near you doing a similar thing. And even if you're just supporting, like buying a couple pieces for like a, what'd you call it? A wall? What's the wall?
Oh, like a feature wall?
Feature wall. Yeah. Like a feature wall or something like that. Like, just anything is better than nothing. It all helps to support the movement.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's salvage companies, reclaim wood companies all over North America. So it's, again, we're not the first ones doing it. We're looking at both sides of it on a big scale over time because we know what's coming. We know that deconstruction is going to get mandated. Also, I mean, it seems like the general public every month and every year is pushing demand for sustainability on a higher level. This year would be, more than ever with all the fires that we're seeing and dramatic weather. So, we know that it's only going to increase. Yeah.
And again, like the sustainability thing, like you point that as an interesting thing, because from a new construction perspective, when you hear about sustainable housing or sustainable building, it's usually in regard to like energy consumption or like weatherproofing, how well it retains heat, using heat pumps as different sources. But like the actual building materials, I feel like are rarely actually ever talked about.
Yeah, they're talked about when you look at like LEED buildings. And that was a positive thing with the whole movement towards LEED and in certifying buildings, because there is some elements around material selection, but it needs to be more on like the mass scale.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I mentioned this before when we were talking, but for every episode I do a donation to a nonprofit of my guest choice. It's kind of like a thank you for appearing on this. Is there a local nonprofit or somewhere you'd like to support and send this week's donation to?
It's a good question. I'd probably say to one of our charitable partners, I guess. And the one that's really trying to get off the ground is the Reuse people. They're a Canadian charity. They don't have a brick and mortar store here yet, but that's something that's in the works.
What's the name of it?
The Reuse People.
The Reuse People is there.
Yeah, that's the charity name.
And what do they do? What's their mission?
Very similar to Habitat Restore. So they're reselling deconstruction materials. So they're a U.S. charity first, and they've become a Canadian charity as well over the last 4 or 5 years. But they need to get off the ground because we need them and Habitat taking these materials in and reselling them.
Yeah. Which leads me to another great thing that people can do too, is like also supporting Habitat for Humanity, Restore, the Reuse People, different organizations like that. Like, because not many people are building with timbers and stuff. There are far more people replacing doorknobs or handles on their cabinetry and stuff, and you can find a lot of really good materials at places like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so.
Awesome, dude. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to sit down and chat with me about this awesome project you got going on.
Thank you.
I'm stoked to check out all the lumber going to good use.
Yeah, my pleasure.
God, I friggin' love that whole concept so much. I want to build a home out of reclaimed timber, That'd be rad. Someday. You can learn more about Unbuilders at unbuilders.com and Heritage Lumber at heritagelumber.ca, which I'll provide links to in the show notes of this episode, as well as links to the Reuse People, recipients of this episode's nonprofit donation. See, every episode I make a donation to a nonprofit or cause of my guest choice, thanks to support from all my Patreon supporters, and you can help contribute to that fund by joining the Patreon fam. If you're enjoying this Nerdy About Nature project, you can help support the production of these podcasts and all those fun educational videos you see all over social media by becoming a Patreon supporter for as little as $1 a month or more at patreon.com/nerdaboutnature, or by making a one-time donation or getting some sweet Nerdy About Nature merch at nerdaboutnature.com. All of this support goes into giving us the stability to continue putting time, energy, resources, and research into all these various topics and subjects to continue making content that aims to educate, inspire, and shape a new future for tomorrow. So if you're enjoying it, then we'd really appreciate your support so that we can keep on doing it. Either way, stoked you're all here learning and engaging for a better world tomorrow. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode, and stay tuned for more to come. Cheers. This episode of the Nerdy About Nature Podchat series was produced by me, Ross Reed, and made possible with support from individuals like yourself. For ways to support this project and to learn more, check out nerdaboutnature.com or at nerdaboutnature on your favorite social platform.